So it is just wonderful to be back here. Thank you for welcoming me, for inviting me, and it's just like, I can't tell you what a joy it is to be in this church again and to see the people that I know and love, and it's just a great honor for me. So my talk this morning is called Love Your Neighbor. And when I was thinking about it, it made me think about Mr. Rogers, who we have lately been reminded about with the two movies that were made about his life recently, Won't You Be My Neighbor, and It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Watching these movies made me aware again of his great love of children and his ability to reach and touch their hearts. One thing that I read about him during this period of time was that he really liked the number 143. He said it stood for I love you. There's one letter in I, and 4 letters in love, and 3 letters in you. When we moved to North Carolina, I realized that the exit from the highway to our house was number 143. So I told Chris, we live at the I love you exit. And then I tell people, if you want to visit, and you're all welcome to visit, not all at the same time, but you just go down I-85 and get off at the I love you exit, and you'll be able to find us. So let's look at the Bible passage for today. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. If we start with this, we can think about what does it mean to love the Lord with all your heart? And can any of us really do this? Who do you know who loves the Lord with all their heart? As I pondered this question, I tried to think about any models of this that I have in my life, and sadly, I came up lacking. Maybe Mother Teresa, maybe a good friend of mine from college who became a priest. Don was no Mother Teresa, but he gave his life fully and willingly and happily to the Lord. But what about all the good and loving people that I know? They and I all fall short of this mark. We love our lives, we love those around us, and without a doubt, we love the Lord. But we don't present ourselves as loving the Lord with all our souls and all our minds and all our strength. However, in this passage, Jesus continues that second in importance is to love your neighbor. And here I found it very interesting that he does not say to love our neighbor as we love God, but to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So let's think on that for a minute. To me, Jesus is saying, maybe most of us are not capable of loving God as we should, but we all love ourselves. So he has set that bar high, but maybe in a place that we can relate to. Unfortunately, this commandment is hardly any easier than the first. It's easy to love ourselves, to forgive ourselves of our shortcomings, to understand when we miss the mark, but it's hard to do this for others. We have to make a conscious effort to love others as we love ourselves. Well, not easy. It is possible, and it can be quite fulfilling. To continue, I will examine this commandment from 3 perspectives. So first is, what is the connection between love and obedience? The second is, who is our neighbor? And the third is, how can we love those who seem to be unlovable? So we'll look first at the connection between love and obedience. Much of what I read about this verse concerns breaking down what Jesus was really saying to the Pharisees. Many biblical scholars believe that Jesus' underlying message was telling them that they need to get to know God, with the implication that to know God is to love him. And with this knowledge, it changed my mind about who I know who loves God with their whole soul, mind, and being. Starting with our ministers, Pastor Tom, Pastor Billy, Sister Leah, where are you? Hiding out over there, okay. And then so many others, people in this church and people in my family, who set a fine example of what it means to strive to know God. All those in my life who have diligently searched for God in their studies, in nature, and in the people around them. But I also read about a corollary to the belief that to know God is to love her, is the belief that to know God is to obey God's commandments and to do good. So many of the things that I read take this one step further to the belief that goodness comes only through love and obedience to God. As I read this, I felt like I wasn't quite there in my own personal journey of faith. I think of those I know who do good, but who do not claim to know or have a relationship with God. And I wonder why we cannot call their actions good. So this is something that I am personally thinking about and dealing, and I'm going to give that to you to ponder. Can those who do not know and love God still do good? Even without knowing this answer, I do believe that if we know and love and follow Jesus, we can do good. I also believe that doing good is easier if you know God. So that leads us to the second part, which is, who is my neighbor? Our children's book answers this question by saying, everyone in the whole world is our neighbor. And this is true, and it's a good place to start. When queried by the Pharisees as to who is our neighbor, Jesus answered by telling the parable of the Good Samaritan and asking his questioners who acted as a neighbor to the man who had been beaten and left by the side of the road. So, as I thought about these two things, I believe that we can answer this in two different ways. So we can answer by looking at who is our neighbor. We think about what categories of people might be considered our neighbor. And again, our storybook tells us it's all the people around us, all over the world. But we could come up with a list of people. It wouldn't be an infinite list. It wouldn't be a finite list. But we could think about these following categories. So our neighbor could be the immigrant, or the disabled, or the old and infirm. It could be the child who is being bullied, or the families who are living in poverty. And all of these people exist in our neighborhood and all across the world. But there's a second way to answer this question, and that answer to who is our neighbor would be I am, that we are. We are the neighbors who need to be like the Good Samaritan and reach out a hand to others. As a member of Govans, I know that for many of us, it's often easy to be the Good Samaritan in a financial sense, to take out our credit card and give $100 to the food bank or send a check to the orphanage in Haiti. Most of us have so much that to give these kinds of gifts doesn't really touch our own lives. But I find in my own life, it is much more difficult to love the neighbors closest to home. those who actually live in our home or near our home, and those who can frustrate us so easily. This is when I really need to know God and to know the love of Jesus, so that I can say, in that trite saying from a few decades ago, what would Jesus do? How does Jesus want me to show his love to a disobedient child, to an alcoholic brother, to a literal neighbor who might have a noisy dog or a loud car, or maybe a deeper problem that I'm unaware of? For this, I can't write a check. I have to know the love of God so I can be the person Jesus wants me to be and show the love of God to others. My mother gave me a great example of how to love my close neighbor when I was a teenager. I'm the second oldest in a family of 7 children. And one night, my littlest sister decided she wanted to sleep with me. She was a chatterbox, and I was having a hard time saying my prayers while she kept prattling on. I complained to my mother when she came by to tuck us in, and she said, "Don't you think God wants you to pay attention to Michelle, who's right there in the bed with you? And maybe try to remember to say your prayers later after she falls asleep?" Simple advice, but one that I remember 50 years later. Of course God wanted me to attend to the person who was right there, and not in a way that showed that I was frustrated or annoyed. And I am so blessed to still have Michelle in my life, not only as a sister, but as a good and treasured friend. So finally, how can we love those who seem to be unlovable? Well, if I could truly answer this question and then give all of you the formula to follow, we would have a much more peaceful world. So I'm not saying that my instructions or advice are the be-all and end-all, but they're merely suggestions based on the first 2 parts of this talk. So the first thing we can do is that we can pray, and prayer can really help. But I've found that sometimes when I'm praying for another person, and I pray and I pray, and I almost get to the point where my prayer is almost like asking for like a good luck charm or something like that. I want the other person to change, obviously. But when I focus on Jesus, the prayer changes. So I can pray for peace of mind about a person or a situation, or pray for myself to be more patient, or simply for God's will to be done. It's not easy to remember to change our prayers and to really think about what we're praying for. And I have to be diligent and come back to this kind of prayer day after day and remind myself. The second thing we can do is reach out to others. Communicating love in small ways can also help. Carolyn and Soul Kitchen are such a great example of reaching out. And Woodbury Crossing, I'm up here in Baltimore this week because my grandson got to go to Woodbury Crossing, and I helped him get back and forth from his home for that. It was a wonderful experience. But we know that in helping others and in reaching out, we have to also be thoughtful listeners. We can't just give them what we think they need. So this is true in our homes as well in our larger community. My children or my brother or my neighbor, they don't really want to hear my advice or how I think they should be living their lives. But maybe what they need is my careful attention, just as Michelle needed so many years ago. Maybe they need me to be available to provide a ride or to take a phone call or to prepare a meal. And then finally, I thought another way to help our neighbors is allow them to be good neighbors to us. While this may sound a little backwards, it brings me back to the idea that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Remember when you were young and you just got your driver's license and your mother first asked you to run an errand in the family car? She might not have needed you to do that, but she knew your desire to get out in the car, and she knew you'd feel good doing her a favor. How can you be the willing recipient of a good deed performed by your child, your brother, your neighbor? Can you ask for help or advice or time spent together? Don't be afraid to reach out in this way. We all need to feel used. In conclusion, we need to get to know God, to be obedient, and to do good. We can do good by loving our neighbors, near and far, not just by helping them, but by building relationships with them. And in this way, our neighbors might also come to know God in a deeper and more meaningful way. And don't forget, one